My story began when I was 23 years old. I lived in my grandmother's old house in the suburbs, which she left to me after her death. My father's mother was a kind woman who always made sure that I had everything I needed. The house wasn't new or expensive, but it was solid and well maintained, located in a quiet neighborhood where birdsong could be heard in the mornings. My name is Letizia, and then my life seemed pretty simple. I had a good job, my own house, and what I thought was a caring family. My mom, stepfather, and younger half-sister Tanya, who had just turned 18, lived in a more modern house closer to the city. They were still paying off a huge mortgage, and it would take them many more years to pay it off. "Letitia, dear, can we talk?" My mom asked one Sunday afternoon when she came to our weekly cup of coffee. I nodded, sensing something unusual in her voice. "You know, my stepfather and I thought that this house of yours was exactly what we had always dreamed of. A quiet place, a garden." I nodded again, wondering what this conversation was leading to. "And I know it's pretty hard for you to get to work from here," she continued. "Our house is so close to your office." And then she outlined her brilliant idea. Exchange of houses. They will move into my grandmother's house, and I will take their place in the townhouse. I just needed to keep paying off their mortgage. "Think about it," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "You'll save so much time on the road, and the house is bigger, more modern. Plus, your stepfather and I have always dreamed of living in such a place." I thought about it. She was not mistaken. Their house was indeed newer, with an updated kitchen and more space. The location would cut my daily commute in half. "What about the documents?" I asked cautiously. "Don't we need to get something in writing?" Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, honey, we're a family. Why spend money on lawyers? You know I would never do anything to hurt you." The move happened quickly. I settled into my new place quite easily. Every month, I honestly sent my mom a mortgage payment, usually even more than I needed, because I wanted to help pay off the debt faster. I invested money in the renovation of the house, replaced old household appliances, made several rooms more cozy and fresher. We have been following this agreement for 4 years. I regularly paid off the mortgage, contributed additional funds when I could, and enjoyed the convenience of a new home. It seemed to me that everything was perfect. I lived closer to work. I had a modern, well-maintained house and a well-established agreement with my family. When I was assigned a 2-week business trip to a neighboring state, I had no premonition of anything unusual. These were standard meetings, presentations, and hotel rooms. But I was looking forward to coming home, to being able to sleep in my own bed again. It was a cold, even evening when the taxi dropped me off at my house. I rolled my suitcase down the driveway, noticing something strange. The porch light was on, and voices were coming from inside. It was weird. I lived alone. And she definitely didn't leave any light. "What the hell?" I muttered, putting the key in the lock. The key didn't fit. I frowned and tried again. Then again. My confusion gradually turned into panic. When I realized that the locks had been replaced, my heart sank, leaving behind an icy void. I barely had time to pull out my phone to call the locksmith when the door suddenly swung open. Standing on the threshold was my younger sister Tanya, who was now 22. She lazily leaned against the door frame, crossing her arms over her chest. She was wearing my favorite fluffy slippers, and she had a smug grin on her face. Behind her, sprawled on my couch, legs spread out on my coffee table, was her new husband, a tall, broad-shouldered guy I only knew briefly. "Oh, you're back," Tonya drawled, not moving from her seat. I blinked, unable to comprehend what was said right away. "Your things are in the garage," she added casually. I froze, clutching the handle of my suitcase. "What did you say?" My voice sounded muffled, as if it were coming from somewhere far away. Your stuff. In the garage, Tanya repeated, her grin widening. I took a deep breath. What are you talking about? This is my home. She idly examined her nails, which were covered with a fresh layer of expensive varnish. The same well-groomed nails that her parents always paid for, even when they claimed they couldn't afford my new school uniform. Not anymore, she replied calmly. Mom and Dad gave it to us for the wedding. The world around me has been shaken. Are you crazy? My voice was shaking. I've been paying the mortgage on this house for 4 years now. Tonia rolled her eyes, looking just like her mom when she was about to brush off someone's feelings. Yes, about that, she shrugged her shoulders. That's not my problem. She made a light gesture with her hand, as if sweeping me out of her sight. You need to leave. Leave? I choked with rage. Until we called the police, she added sweetly. I was standing on my own porch, in my own house, but they told me to leave as if I were a stranger. Suddenly, the memories came flooding back, one after the other. All these years, when Tanya received special treatment. Her new iPhone, while I was using the old cot. Her designer outfits while I was shopping for clothes at a thrift store. Her new car for her 16th birthday, while I was on the bus. She paid for college while I was working 2 jobs to finish my studies at a community college. And now she's taken my house away from me. I stood trembling with rage while my little sister prepared to slam the door in my face. Where should I go? I asked softly, almost in a whisper. She shrugged her shoulders. Not my problem. Rent a hotel or something. Just don't come back here. The door slammed shut. Laughter came from inside. I don't remember how I got to the car. I don't remember driving down the highway at night. My mind was gripped by a single thought: they had tricked me. I turned the steering wheel, steering the car towards where I should have at least found shelter. My grandmother's house. The one I exchanged. When I arrived, the porch was flooded with soft light, casting long shadows on the manicured garden that I once took care of. I got out of the car, my footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. I balled my hand into a fist, and before I could change my mind, I knocked loudly on the door. Mom! I shouted. Open it. We need to talk about what Tanya just did. There was movement inside. Whispered voices. The footsteps were approaching the door. But it didn't open. Letitia. My mother's voice was muffled, but clear enough. Go away. I blinked in disbelief. What? Mom, open the door. My voice was shaking. Tanya just kicked me out of my house. From a house that I've been paying the mortgage on for 4 years. Silence. And then my mother's voice was joined by another, deeper, dry one. The stepfather's voice. It's not your house anymore. I froze. And this house isn't yours either, he continued. This is our home now. The world seemed to roll under my feet. I struggled to stay in place, clenching my fists so hard that my nails dug into my palms. What are you talking about? My voice sounded hoarse. This is my house. Grandma left it to me. You need to leave. Mom's voice was flat, cold, with that note of stern confidence she used when she thought she was acting wisely. Go get an apartment somewhere. Stop going from house to house making everyone nervous. I pressed my palms against the door, trying to collect my thoughts, force myself to calm down. Making you nervous? I exhaled, shaking my head in shock. Are you kidding? You kicked me out of my house. Tonia lives in the house I paid for, and now you don't even want to talk about it? We've invested a lot in this house, Mom replied sharply. I felt my blood boil in my veins. What about the money I spent on repairing your house? I shouted, no longer caring about what the neighbors would say. New household appliances. Renovated bathroom. For years of mortgage payments. That's different, Mom snapped. I laughed, but it sounded better, almost raucous. Something else? How? How could it be different? In desperation, I slammed my palm on the door. That's what you've been planning all this time, isn't it? Did you make me pay the mortgage while you were living in my house, and then you gave it to Tanya and kept Grandma's house for yourself? It's a very good plan, Mom. Leave me homeless while you all share my possessions. There was silence. And then my mother's voice, cold and hard as a knife blade. You need to leave now, Letitia. This is our home. And we don't want you here. Something inside me broke. All those years of mortgage payments. Countless home improvements. And my whole life is watching Tanya get everything she wants. But this wasn't just a new phone or a designer bag. It was my home. I took a deep breath. When I spoke again, my voice was calm and even. Actually, Mom, you're wrong about one thing, I said. This is my house. There was a pause. Legally, I continued, ownership is still in my name. Grandma left it to me, remember? And since you love kicking people out of their homes so much, maybe it's time for me to repay you in kind. You wouldn't dare, my stepfather growled. I chuckled. Try to stop me, I retorted. I won't be good anymore. I won't let you use me anymore. My fingers tightened around the strap of the suitcase. Get out of my house. Or I'll make you leave. Legally. There was a deep silence outside the door. I waited a little longer, then turned around and left. I had nowhere to go. But I knew what I had to do. An hour later, I checked into a cheap hostel. The room was tiny, with a sagging mattress and a rattling light bulb on the ceiling. I didn't look at her. I just sat on the bed, pulled out my phone, and started looking for lawyers. The lawyer I hired, Mr. Guido, didn't delay. 2 days later, he prepared all the necessary documents for the eviction. I stood behind him on the porch of my grandmother's house, watching him knock on the door with confident, professional movements. Mom opened the door. Her face instantly paled when she saw the legal documents in Mr. Guido's hands. Good morning, Mrs. Elcotto. His voice was crisp and businesslike. I'm here on behalf of your daughter, Letizia, the rightful owner of this property. Mom blinked, as if she didn't understand what he was saying. I'm handing you an official eviction notice, Mr. Guido continued, handing over the documents. You can't do this. My stepfather's angry voice was heard. He appeared behind Mom, his face red with rage. Mr. Guido didn't even blink. Actually, we can. You have 3 days to vacate the premises. If you do not comply, we will be forced to involve the police and sue for forced eviction. I stood in silence, watching my mom's face change from shock to anger, and then, to fear. She looked at me. Her gaze was pleading, appealing. But I turned away. I'm done with her manipulations. Letitia, honey, my mother began, her voice suddenly becoming soft, lingering, enveloping like molasses. We can talk about it. I looked at her, and at that moment, everything that had previously hurt me suddenly turned into indifference. It was time to talk before you locked me in my house and gave it to Tanya. I cut her off. 3 days, Mom. That's all you'll get. These 3 days dragged on endlessly. I stayed in my hostel, flinching every time the phone rang. I expected angry messages, threats, new tricks, but, surprisingly, they really obeyed. On the 4th morning, Mr. Guido called me, informing me that my parents had moved out and the house was vacant again. When I arrived, they were loading the last boxes into the van. Mom was standing in the driveway, looking at me with red-rimmed eyes. "You're not my daughter," she hissed, tears streaming down her face. "You're a traitor. After all we've done for you." I laughed bitterly. "You mean you used me to pay the mortgage for 4 years while you were secretly planning to steal my house?" "Yes, thanks for that." She got into the car without a word. I stood there watching them leave for some rented apartment. They were followed by a van with their belongings, and suddenly the driveway was empty. My house was mine again. I opened the door and went inside. The first thing that caught my eye was the chaos. Open boxes, clothes left behind in some places, empty cups, a rumpled bed. But nothing serious was damaged. I went into the living room. In my grandmother's living room. In my living room. And suddenly a thought hit me with crystal clarity. I finished paying off their mortgage. They violated our verbal agreement the moment they kicked me out. I paid for this house. Now they can deal with the consequences. I sat in my grandmother's old rocking chair, feeling her presence around me. For the first time since the beginning of this nightmare, I smiled. But it was still bubbling inside. I couldn't stop thinking about all the money I had invested in my parents. New kitchen. An expensive water heater. Renovated bathroom. I treated this house as my own. I believed that one day it would be real. What a kick in the teeth this realization turned out to be. I paid the mortgage by contributing more than I needed to, thinking I was doing something smart for my future. According to my calculations, there were only about $50,000 left. Just 2 years of payments and the house would have been fully paid off. I was so close. All that money, I whispered to the empty room. All these additional payments. And suddenly one memory surfaced. I hadn't given it much thought at the time, but now it flashed before me in a completely new light. It was right after we finished exchanging houses. Mom was sitting at her new kitchen table, stirring her coffee with an innocent expression on her face. The one that always appeared to her when she wanted something. "Letitia, dear," she said, looking up at me. "I was thinking, since we're living here now, maybe you should just transfer ownership of the house to us. You know, make it official." I froze. "We will transfer our house to you as soon as the mortgage is paid, of course." I remembered how sensibly she had tried to present it. It was as if we were just putting the papers in order. But I had a better idea. Why not do the opposite? I suggested. "Let's transfer the mortgage to my name right now. I will continue to officially make payments, and then you will immediately transfer my grandmother's house to me." I remember how her face changed. Just for a split second. Before she pulled on her usual mask. "Oh, no," she said hurriedly. "It would be so difficult with the bank. It's better to just wait until the mortgage is paid. Then we can make a clean exchange of both houses." The stepfather jumped up, nodding vigorously. "It's much easier this way. So you don't need to involve a bank or lawyers." He smiled, spreading his arms. "We are a family, after all." I was sitting in my grandmother's rocking chair, digging my nails into the armrests. I should have noticed it then. I should have seen the lie. Now, when I looked at the stripped walls, at the traces of their stay here, at everything that I had to go through, I could finally see everything clearly. They were never going to give me this house. They wanted both their house and mine. If I had then rewritten my grandmother's house on them, as they asked, a chill ran down my spine. I would be completely homeless. Without a backup plan, without legal rights to any property. Just outside while my family was enjoying both houses. At least I was smart enough to keep this house legally mine. It was little consolation when I thought about all the money I had lost. But it was something. A roof over your head. A place they couldn't take away from me anymore. And, most importantly, the lesson. A lesson about trust. Even when it came to family. Maybe especially when it came to family. Exactly 3 days after the missed mortgage payment, my phone rang. I was sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, slowly drinking coffee and trying to put my life back together. Mom's name appeared on the screen. I almost dropped the call. But part of me wanted this confrontation. Where is the mortgage payment? Mom snapped without even saying hello. Her voice was cold, harsh, as if I were an overdue tenant and not her daughter. The bank is going to charge us fines for delay. I laughed. And that probably sounded a little unstable. Are you seriously calling to ask me for money right now? Of course I'm calling. Let me get this straight, I said, gripping the mug so tightly that my knuckles turned white. You're kicking me out of the house I'm paying for. You give it to Tanya and her new husband. And you still expect me to keep making payments? This house belongs to Tanya. Mom blurted out. I froze. I'm sorry, what? My voice was icy. You turned it off. And then she let Tonya pay for it. Mom continued, not paying attention to my tone. I snorted. She lives there now, doesn't she? I asked slowly. Is she living her best life in the house I renovated? Silence. And who pays for it? I already knew the answer. Mom's voice became shrill, breaking into a squeal. Tanya can't pay the mortgage. She just graduated from college. It's not even working yet. Not my problem, I snapped. They just had a wonderful wedding. They're still settling in. I sighed. Not mine problem. I turned it off. And immediately I felt a strange calm descend on me. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Not anymore, Mom, I replied before she could speak. Did you give her my house? Great. She now receives mortgage payments as well. There was a pause. And then Mom's voice changed. Deep. Heavy. The same tone she's been using to manipulate me all my life. Okay, then we'll just move back into your house. I laughed out loud. Damn it, try it, I scoffed. And I'll call the police for trespassing. I've already evicted you once. Do you want a second round? You can't just stop paying. Mom screamed. We had an agreement. The agreement you broke when you gave my house to Tanya and her husband. Mom was breathing heavily into the phone. I leaned back in my chair, continuing. Besides, I'm almost done paying it off, right? There's only $50,000 left. The silence on the other end of the line was long. Too long. My stomach clenched. It was the kind of silence that foreshadowed bad news. Very bad ones. Mom, I exhaled slowly. Is that more than 50,000? Her voice became quiet. Almost guilty. How much more? Pause. Longer. I could hear her breathing. And then, about $150,000, she finally muttered. The world seemed to tilt sideways. My coffee mug slipped out of my hand and hit the counter, but fortunately it didn't break. It's impossible, I gasped, barely finding the strength to speak. I've been paying extra on this mortgage for 4 years now. I made thousands more than the required payments. There is no way. My voice faltered. What did you do with the extra money that I sent? The silence on the other side of the line was deafening. When Mom finally spoke, her words made me freeze. Oh, we paid regular mortgage payments, she said casually, as if discussing the weather. And the extra money? Well, we had expenses. My voice became barely audible, like a whisper. What expenses? Mom sighed, as if talking to her own child about her own money was a burden to her. Well, my stepfather and I needed a vacation after all the stress of moving, she said. We went to Europe for 3 weeks. Paris, Rome, Madrid. Beautiful cities. I gritted my teeth. Then there was Tanya's studies. You know how expensive private universities are now. I gasped for air, but she continued, not noticing how her words cut into me like blades. And, of course, we had to renovate the house. I couldn't breathe. Years of additional payments. Thousands and thousands of dollars. Spent on vacation. For my sister's studies. To renovate a house that I wasn't even allowed into. You. My voice caught in my throat. Did you take my money and go on vacation with it? Don't be so dramatic, Letitia, she said irritably. We're a family. We just redistributed the funds to where they were needed more. I didn't answer. I just slowly took the phone away from my ear and pressed end call. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped my phone on the table. I was just sitting in my grandmother's rocking chair, feeling like I was shaking with rage and betrayal. When I finally managed to calm down, I did the only right thing in this situation. I've blocked their numbers. Mom. My stepfather. Tanya. 2 days later, they showed up at my door. They were knocking. They shouted as if they were the owners of this house. Open this door right now. Mom screamed. We need to talk about the mortgage payment. I stood on the other side of the door, not moving. There's nothing to talk about, I said flatly. I won't pay another cent. You must. The stepfather barked. His voice was angry, demanding. You are responsible for these payments. Actually, no, I called back, feeling much stronger with a solid door between us. But you know what? I have bank statements showing my every payment. Silence. I have text messages and emails about our agreement on the exchange of houses. I paused, enjoying the tense silence from the other side. This is proof of fraud. I stood for a moment, and then added. According to the lawyer I talked to yesterday. More silence. If you don't stop harassing me, I continued, I'm going to sue you. And believe me, I can afford a long and expensive lawsuit much better than you can. There was a heavy exhalation outside the door. Do you want to try your luck? The answer was screams. Loud. Dirty ones. Words that would make even a sailor blush. I waited until the sound of their car faded into the night. Only then did I allow myself to exhale. A week later, my cousin Tracy called me. Letitia, you might want to know, she began. Your parents have problems. I didn't say anything, letting her continue. They can't handle the mortgage payments. They burned all their savings. Even the pension fund. I blinked slowly. And Tanya, Tracy hesitated. What's wrong with her? She had a huge fight with them when they told her that she had to pay the mortgage now. I chuckled. Apparently, Tracy added, she was shouting that she was promised a free house, not a debt. I closed my eyes. The neighbors heard them arguing from across the street, she continued. I didn't answer. I just hung up the phone. She stared out the window. There, in the garden, the irises planted by my grandmother were spreading purple petals, standing out vividly against the background of greenery. She always said that you reap what you sow. I thought about it. What kind of harvest will my family reap from the seeds of betrayal that they so diligently sowed? 3 months after I stopped paying off my mortgage, the rumors started to fly like sparks in a dry wind. They followed the chain of acquaintances, passing from one relative to another, until they finally reached me. My cousin Emma called first. You won't believe this, she said, barely able to contain her delight. I took a sip of coffee and pressed the phone to my ear. Try to surprise me. Your parents called the police on Tanya and her husband. I choked on it. What? Yeah, apparently they told Tanya that either she starts paying off the mortgage or she gets out of the house. She refused. Then they came with 2 policemen and an eviction notice. I was silent. Neighbors say Tonia screamed about broken promises while her things were packed in the car, Emma continued. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to experience Schadenfreude. But instead, I felt just fatigue. And that was just the first call. Then the others went. Each with a new piece of the puzzle. Aunt Sarah said that my parents tried to borrow from everyone who had at least some money. Uncle Bob reported that they were trying to refinance the mortgage, but the bank refused. Cousin Mark mentioned that they were even considering a reverse mortgage. But the most shocking call came from Aunt Mary, Mom's sister. The family gossip girl. A real treasure trove of information. Letizia, did you know about other loans? Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. I tensed up. What other loans? They took out personal loans for Tanya's car. I abruptly sat up straighter. You mean her fancy Mercedes? The one she got for graduation? That's it, Aunt Mary confirmed. And that's not all. They borrowed money for her honeymoon. What? A 2-week trip to the Maldives was fully paid for. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. They're deeply in debt, Letitia. I've been sitting with this information for a while, thinking about all the times I've eaten instant noodles to save up money for additional mortgage payments. The last piece of the puzzle came from my friend Sarah. We were sitting in a cafe when she suddenly leaned towards me, lowering her voice. I probably shouldn't tell you this, she began. I raised an eyebrow. But the bank sent your parents a demand letter last week. I stirred my coffee slowly. Let me guess, I said. They're about to lose their house. Sarah nodded. If they don't find the money soon, the bank will confiscate it. I knew what would happen next. They'll show up at my door. With tear-stained faces. Apologizing. Begging for help. Mom will probably even bring her signature apple pie, just like when she first suggested the house swap. But I was no longer their ATM. And she wasn't going to look at them with pity. Tonia won't be able to manipulate them anymore. They made their choice. Multiple mortgages. Personal loans. Luxury trips. Expensive cars. Now they can live with the consequences. I looked around. My grandmother's house. My house. Solid walls. A blooming garden. She left it to me because she wanted me to have a secure future. Not so that I can help my parents out again. They're going to lose everything, Aunt Mary said in her last call. And then she asked, won't you help them? I thought about it. About the 4 years spent paying off their mortgage. About the money that went into their vacation while I was saving on food. About how I was kicked out of my house. About my stuff thrown into the garage. About Tanya, who lives in a house that I paid for. I took a deep breath and said, no. My aunt gasped. Letitia, you can't. Sometimes the hardest lesson is, I interrupted her, that you can't help people who don't want to help themselves. I heard her sigh. My parents made their bed, I said. Now let them lie down in it. I put the phone away. She put it aside. She looked out the window again. The irises, planted by my grandmother, opened their purple petals, standing out vividly against the background of greenery. She always said, you reap what you sow. And for the first time in a long time, I was sure that I had sown the right seeds. And now it's time to live. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.